guys, it's a scam. It's a scam. Okay, come on, fish. I got you. I got you. I got you. Heck yeah. Look at that. That's a Skamania. Alright, this is summer Skamania fishing, so I'm keeping this one. This one could potentially be a rainbow and not a scam. I don't know. Looks pretty scammy to me. It's the right time of year and the right location. Hey y'all, Tab here with Real Michigan Anglers, and one of my subscribers commented in a previous video that it would be cool if I did a tips video for Skamania fishing. So here it is. I'm going to give you guys a few pointers specific towards targeting Skamania, also known as summer run steelhead. So if you haven't already watched my video, when, where, and how to catch steelhead, check that video out. A lot of the stuff pertaining to Skamania is the same as steelhead and is covered in that in much more detail than I'm going into here. But the rundown on a Skamania is that a Skamania is a steelhead strain that tolerates warmer water temperatures and has been brought over to create an early season of steelhead fishing. So if you're looking to catch a Skamania or really itching to catch some steelhead, but it's summer and it's a little early for things, Skamania is your only option. Skamania is what's around in the summertime. So Skamania usually hit the river starting in June, but even as early as May. Basically when the spring steelhead run starts ending, that's when the Skamania start entering the rivers and fattening up for the breeding season. So for a Skamania, the breeding season is slightly earlier than a regular steelhead, but we're still talking like February through March, somewhere in that range. But they enter the rivers much sooner because they tolerate the warmer water temperatures and they favor chasing bait fish and things that are moving into the rivers in summer. So Skamania can be caught May through May, essentially. But they kind of march to the beat of their own drum compared to other steelhead in certain ways. Because Skamania come into the river when the river is warmer, and because they are actively feeding and searching for food the entire time that they're there, leading into and through winter, they are in the river actively feeding and looking for cool places to stay comfy and cozy. So if you're searching for Skamania, you want to look for cold water is like the main first thing, especially these early season fish. If it's May or June or July and you're going after steelhead, you should be focusing on the coldest rivers in your area and most likely the colder creeks that are tributaries of these larger rivers. That is where you're going to find more Skamania, as well as at the mouths of any major river or any major creek leading into any major river that connects to the Great Lakes. Particularly Lake Michigan. There's a lot more Skamania on the west side of the state than there is on the east side of the state for sure. So if you're going after those early Skamania, you need to go find cold water closer to Lake Michigan, creek mouths, creeks, at the piers. Definitely, if you follow water temperatures, you can be very successful fishing for them at the piers. The temperatures that you want to look for Skamania is 70 degrees and under is
where you might find Skamania. Now, ultimately Skamania are chasing food sources, so if you find some nice 65-degree water and you're feeling all good, but none of the bait fish are in that area, you might still be out of luck. So follow the bait fish, follow the cold waters, watch for the lake to flip. There's different ways that you can do that. You can get on and figure out like what are the temperatures at different parts of the water, and you'll see at some point in the summer in various areas those positions flip and the cold water moves up or closer to the shore, and that's when these fish start to move into shore. And mostly because they're following bait fish, but also because that's their comfortable temperature zone. So if it's 100 degrees out in June, your chances of catching a Skamania in the rivers are probably pretty slim, but if the conditions are right, you might be able to find them around the piers or at the mouths of major rivers where they meet the Great Lakes. Okay, so those are kind of the big things to look for. Once you're on the river and you're looking for Skamania, what you want to look for is deeper holes that are going to hold colder water, shade that's going to create cooler water, cover, specifically log jams. Skamania love to hang out under logs. If you aren't losing lures on logs while you're chasing Skamania, you're not trying hard enough. You should be throwing right up in that stuff. Occasionally losing something is part of the game. Skamania tend to be skittish, especially in areas that are pressured, and because Skamania tend to be concentrated in specific areas early in the season, these fish are very heavily pressured, and that is a large part of why they like to hang out in shady log jams where they're not having lures bouncing off their face all day by 800 fishermen trying to fish one hole. And that's just the nature of early Skamania fishing. Now, as we move through summer and things start to get colder, these fish are going to start spreading out, and they're eventually going to be all over every river that connects to Lake Michigan that's not pumping out hot, nasty water. Okay, so as we move into, say, July, chances of finding them open up and increase. As we get into August, now they're going to be further up into the river systems, they're going to be much more spread out, and these fish, these are migratory fish. Just because they're in your river this week doesn't mean they're in your river next week, you know. They like to move around, they will change rivers, they will change tributaries within a main river system, they will straight up like cross the whole state. There's proof from scientific efforts with tagging steelhead that most steelhead will stay in their general region of birth, but somewhere around 10 to 20% of them will end up all over the state, and maybe even on the opposite side in one of the other Great Lakes. So you never know. There can always be that oddball one, and you could go find that oddball fish here and there. But for good chances of finding decent amounts of Skamania, you know, stick to the areas like we talked about before. As we get into fall, where the salmon start moving in, this is when things get really fun with Skamania. The Skamania are going to be eating all these king salmon eggs, they're going to be eating all these coho eggs, they're going to be following these fish upriver and hanging out behind pods of salmon. So if you're salmon fishing and you're catching a whole bunch of salmon and there's a deeper hole just behind where those salmon are, a lot of times that's a great spot to find some of these Skamania and some of these early running fall steelhead. So what is the difference between a Skamania and a regular steelhead? Other than the ability to tolerate warmer temperatures, Skamania have a slightly different physiology. They are typically longer and skinnier. You can usually tell by looking. If it's very long and skinny for a steelhead, it's probably a Skamania. And because Skamania hold over in the rivers throughout late summer, through the fall, through the winter, and into the spring, you will catch Skamania mixed in with the steelhead that you're catching in the fall, winter, and spring. And you might not even notice that it's a Skamania if you're not paying attention or don't have a trained eye for it. but you'll notice that the coloration is different because they've been in the river for so long. Their coloration can be totally different than a regular steelhead. So instead of the typical chrome or the silver with a pink stripe, you might see a lot more darker colors or really vibrant pinks or even purple hues in some of these Skamania. But they can look just like a chrome steelhead too when you get these fresh summer Skamania around, July in the summer. So the other big difference is just the skittish nature and how they fight on the end of the line. A Skamania fights different than a regular steelhead. Skamania are known for being extra acrobatic, and in my experience, Skamania really know how to use log jams against you, and they go right for them every time. So when you're targeting Skamania, it's not a bad idea to use a heavier rod and heavier line so that you can actually withstand a chance of pulling these Skamania out of some of these log jams that they basically live in for the summer. If you're worried about line-shy fish, which makes sense in a fair amount of Skamania steelhead situations, you can use lighter line. Just be prepared knowing that if there's a lot of log jams in that area, you're probably going to lose some fish, but you're going to get some fun battles. I'm 1 for 6 on Skamania so far this summer, and all except for the one that I landed and one other I lost because they would swim right for a log jam and wrap themselves around it and break the line. That's just what Skamania do, so be prepared for that, and you should be okay. At least you're going to have fun battling some really crazy acrobatic fish. If you're used to a lot of spring steelhead fishing, the fight is nowhere near the same. If you've never battled a Skamania, it's something you need to do. At least go hook into one, because the fight is really quite a riot, and they really are faster and more acrobatic than a regular steelhead. This is partially as a result of the fact that Skamania have an oversized tail. Skamania bait choices are actually a little bit different than typical steelhead bait choices because of the time of the year. So Skamania are moving up into the rivers early on, chasing after bait fish primarily at that time of year. As the season moves on and there's more fish in the river that are laying eggs, they tend to bite a lot more eggs. But there's always some amount of fish eggs in the area, so if you know what kind of fish eggs exist in the river system you're in, during the time that Skamania are there, eggs can be a good presentation. But a lot of people do really well with night crawlers, because a Skamania is just a trout, and when they're in a river, they're looking for worms. If they're not finding bait fish especially, they're going to grab a worm when they see it. So night crawlers or jigs and wax worms. Spawn bags tend to work pretty well for Skamania because the scent really seems to hone them in on it more. But I've probably hooked about an even amount of Skamania on beads versus spawn bags. But the other thing to consider is that lures are a really good option for Skamania, and that most people targeting them are float fishing with beads or jigs, or shrimp. Other things that they like to feed on. Crayfish, I know for a fact that you can catch steelhead on crayfish. I just caught one on a crayfish imitation. I know people that have caught them on crayfish. So they're just acting like a normal trout in the river when they move in. It isn't until midwinter to early spring that they really start thinking about spawning. Otherwise, they're thinking about fattening up for the spawn. So they're going to be very opportunistic feeders, and you're going to have a fair chance at hooking up with them. They're not as tight-lipped as winter steelhead. But come winter through spring, you can definitely expect that bite to slow down. You can expect those fish to transition out of the holes in the feeding areas and into the gravel areas where they're going to spawn and lay their eggs, or where they're going to hold to move on to those areas when the right temperatures come. So from the beginning of summer through spring. That gives you an idea of where to look, what to use, and how to get inside of the mindset of a Skamania. Alright, good luck in your quest to catch some Skamania. I hope that's all very helpful. Stay tuned. Hopefully I'll have another Skamania video before the kings and the co-hosts start showing up. So stay tuned for that, and we'll catch you guys on the flip side.
Fish on. Ooh. Uh-oh. I think he hung me up in the log. Ah. Big fish on.
Oh!
Fish on. Fish on. No, it came off as I was trying to grab the net. Fish on. No. No, no, no. Oh, he's hung up on that log. It's got me wrapped.
Oh, lift up, lift up.
Nice!
No!
Pro level scoop there, dude. That was
Holy
great.
Let's go! That's my boy, bro. First scam, bro. That's my first one
First
ever.
scam? Hell yeah. That's a good one.
That's a beautiful fish, bro.
Hell
yeah. Dude, let's go, man. Great job.